r/AskReddit. Serious, what's the creepiest or scariest thing you've seen but no one believes you? I wrote about this a while ago. None of my family really believes me, everyone just dismissed me as imagining things. Copy and pasting below. So I was getting on the elevator in the metro. To get from the train platform to the main platform with the turnstiles and exit, you have to take the elevator. So I got on with this older guy, it was just us two. And I glanced over and this guy was watching me. Pointedly. And he was smiling but not in a nice, welcoming way. You know, in cliché creepypastas where they talk about monsters with unnaturally wide smiles? That's exactly the kind of smile this guy had. Anyway, I looked away from him because I thought he was just crazy or something. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw him making these weird gestures all over his chest. It almost looked like he was making the sign of the cross or something. Finally, the elevator doors opened and we both got off and walked towards the turnstiles. I swiped my card to exit and then turned around to see if this dude was following me. And he was gone. There was nowhere else he could have gone, we were at the only exit for the station. Unless he turned back, ran and got on another elevator in about 4 seconds. I don't know. I don't know where the F he went. Anyway, I'm from a small town and sometimes weird things happen in the city that I don't quite understand, but I just chalk it up to me being practically a redneck. But this was really out there, and it's been bothering me. Anyway, there we go, that's all. Thanks for reading. Ghost story time. I was living with a few of my friends a year and a half ago and we're all pretty religious, at least 2 of us work in religion. We were talking about how we didn't believe in ghosts or demons, at least in the sense that we couldn't see them if they were real. We started talking about how if we saw one would change our perspective entirely. I said out loud, if something is here I wish it would just show us. 2 nights later I'm sound asleep and hear the most vivid, brutal nightmare I've ever had. Long story short, I was in my childhood house, we were getting robbed, and the robber shot my father, only it was me, I was the robber. My father and I had a very strained relationship and the detail of the shooting woke me up in tears. I mean, I was sobbing. I looked at the foot of my bed and saw a man sitting on his heels staring at me. It looked like he was 80 years old, but never hit puberty, that's as best I can describe it. His face looked kind but his eyes looked so wicked it struck terror into my soul. He almost looked curious, but morbidly so. He was wearing clothes that looked like he was a newspaper salesman from 1890s New York. I only saw him for a split second and he was gone. The wild thing is I got all of that detail in just a split second, like he wanted me to remember him. Here's the crazy part. So I was spooked to shit, right? I went into our living room and watched YouTube and some Twitch streams for a bit until I convinced myself I was just half asleep and still spooked. I lay back in bed and the moment my head hits the pillow my roommate sits straight up in bed, still asleep, points at the foot of my bed and says, blank, and my name, who is that? I lost my goddamn mind. I literally drove home at 3 AM and told my parents through tears I wanted to stay home until summer. I stayed at home for a week or so and then went back. My roommate started having night terrors after that, but we moved soon after. I've never been so scared in all of my life. Edit. I've had questions about my roommate's night terrors. The one I saw happened the first night I was back. Basically, we're both sound asleep and he wakes up screaming. I don't mean yelling, I mean screaming. It sounded like an animal in pain. For those of you who have been hunting before, he sounded like a deer screaming after being shot. I got down on the floor, he just slept on a mattress, and tried to calm him down, but we locked eyes and he started to try to climb over me, still screaming. He looked afraid, absolutely terrified. After 2 or 3 minutes he stopped all of a sudden, started mumbling and went back to sleep. I was holding his hands and our fingers were locked like when you wrestle, and I had bruises the next day because of how hard he squeezed. The next morning I asked him if he remembers waking up screaming and he said, no, but I had a crazy dream. You got down from your bed and started attacking me, but you were covered in this black sludge. Like your face was melting off, but it was this tar-like goo that smelled like decay. After that 2 of my other roommates and I got together and prayed in our room. Nothing quite as bad happened after that. Some other less entertaining stuff happened, like couches being stripped of their cushions and things spilling in the middle of the night. One time a bottle of wine just effing exploded out of nowhere and scared us to death. Thanks for the silver was my first. Edit number 2. To be clear, I'm a seminary student and I work in ministry for high school students. Not exactly a youth pastor, but sort of. I don't believe in spiritual healings or anything like that. I'm much more naturalistic about my beliefs, but these things really happened. Whether it was a hallucination or genuine spiritual thing, I have no idea. I don't like to think about it. No one ever believes me when I tell them this, except the few people that are involved. My dad thinks we are just too imaginative, even though my mom and I will tell the exact same stories at different times, never having talked to each other. But anyway, here's what I have to contribute. It's a copy and paste, by the way. I've told this story on Reddit before. My story starts when I was roughly 8. My parents bought an old farmhouse that's over 100 years old. We found newspaper clippings in the wall when they renovated it from 1864. I had 2 brothers at the time, and we were all outside playing, and they had a tendency to pick on me, so I decided I was done putting up with it and went in the house to tattle, as 8-year-olds do. I yelled several times for my mom and finally got back. "What is it, dear?" Not seeing her, I yell, "Where are you?" Again I hear a voice, "I'm over here, dear." I don't see her and call out again. This repeats about 4 times, and as I get closer and the voice gets louder, I passed by a window and glanced out to see my mom and dad out in the distance working on a tractor. My heart jumps into my throat and I book it outside. My brothers are exactly where they were when I went in, so I know it's not one of them messing with me. Throughout the years I hear voices, televisions, and strange noises constantly throughout the house, but just assume I'm hearing things. Move up a bit to me being 17. Parents left town for a few days and I had some friends come over. Night starts off normal, we play some video games and all is well. 2 of my friends need to use the bathroom, so one goes downstairs and one stays upstairs since there's 2 bathrooms in the house. First friend comes back from the bathroom and says, yes, really funny guys, to the 3 of us that are in the room. We have no idea what he's talking about. He said, banging on the door and making weird sounds while I'm taking a piss. So funny. We are all genuinely confused as we haven't moved. He doesn't believe us but sits down and rejoins the group. Now the second friend comes back from downstairs and has a similar complaint. He says we were bouncing a ball, shuffling things around, laughing outside the door, and heard us run off when the toilet flushed. We again are confused, especially since there weren't enough of us to mess with both of them at the same time. Conversation kind of drops, but neither seem convinced we did nothing. A couple hours go by and for some reason the conversation comes up again. We deny it, they don't believe it. Eventually that turns into jokes about ghosts and how we disturbed them when the house was remodeled. I was about 13 when we started remodeling. Jokes continue and someone said, "Oh come on now, you can't really believe that ghosts exist." And everyone is like, no, they probably don't. On the other side of the room is a single fold closet door, and right as we said that, this door explodes open so violently that the folds slam together and bounce almost back shut. We immediately end that conversation, flip every light in the house on, and no one dared to touch that door. The next day I wanted to make sure something didn't fall, but as I open the door there is nothing close to the door and nothing big enough that even could have fallen to slam that door open. Move forward to me being 20 and telling my mom of the weird things that I witnessed. She tells me, "Oh, I know there's at least a family of 3 that I know of. 2 little boys, one always has a bouncing ball and the other giggles a lot, and an old man." I hadn't even gotten to that part in my story. When I was 3, we were picking up my grandparents for a Sunday drive. I was sitting in the back seat on the passenger side. My grandfather was sitting in front of me. Suddenly he keeled over, dead of a massive stroke. As they hustled my little sister and me out of the car and into my grandparents' store, I happened to look over my shoulder and plainly saw Grandpa walking down the street with 2 men. Both were dressed in suits, which made it all the more incongruous that Grandpa was wearing the same grey sweater and peaked hat he'd been wearing a moment before in the car. There was nothing particularly creepy about the experience, except that I wouldn't accept that Grandpa was dead because, after all, I'd just seen him walking down the street. Naturally, this didn't go over very well. But I loved my grandpa, I didn't want him to be dead, and I knew what I had seen. When our family doctor arrived to pronounce Grandpa dead, my mother asked me if I would take his word for it. We had a very good, trusting relationship with our doctor, so I said that I would. The doctor assured me that my grandfather had in fact died. But he was the only grown-up who didn't treat me like I was crazy. He listened respectfully as I told him what I had seen, and he suggested that maybe the men in the suits were angels. This seemed reasonable. Problem solved. But to this day I can still see Grandpa walking down the street with those two men. And no matter what my parents tried to tell me, it wasn't just a guy who looked like Grandpa coincidentally wearing exactly the same clothes he'd been wearing in the car. It was him. Not sure if this counts because I have at least 2 people that do believe me. After coming home from work one day, I was walking through my kitchen towards the living room when a frying pan just flew across the room and hit me square between the shoulders. My roommate and a friend of his both saw it happen and lost their shit. Wasn't the only time we saw weird shit in that house. I saw a shadow person in the same spot almost every day. Heard extremely heavy footsteps stomping across our roof with no explanation. My roommate says he saw a full laundry basket just flip itself upside down while it was flat on the ground. He also claims to have seen an ugly little green goblin-looking demon in our living room one night. So, yeah, that's all I got. Edit. I see several people suggesting carbon monoxide poisoning as a possible explanation. We have several brand new detectors all through the house. Since it's a rental, we also just recently had to pass an inspection from the city that checked all the appliances, etc. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a like and comment your thoughts. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing as well.